consider this a confession of sorts, a public declaration of not all the things, some of the things that I did wrong in home ed. And actually, it's not even like a past tense. Some of these things are things that I'm working on every day, but here are 5 things that you should not do when you home ed. One of the very first mistakes I made was that I sought to reinvent the wheel with everything. And I did this mistake as a teacher as well. I would never just take someone else's plans. I would always want to start afresh, build up something completely new, build up whole systems and structures. And I enjoy doing that, but I went way over the top when I started home editing. So when my firstborn was 4.5, 5, I am not exaggerating when I say I spent hours and hours and hours creating up not just plans and curriculums, but whole systems of teaching my son. I had this document that had different symbols for different areas of learning. I had everything was alliterative and special. It was like I was creating something to publish, and yet it was only me that saw it. And to be honest, I only saw it a couple of times before I realised that was more about me trying to control things than actually what was going to be beneficial of our home ed. And I've learned a lot from that. I still plan because I enjoy it, but I don't try and reinvent the wheel every time. I take someone else's wheel and I just adjust it a little bit for me, or I have a wheel that might be a little bit bumpy sometimes, but that's okay. So don't think you have to reinvent the wheel. You do not have to come up with a brand new way of doing something. Planning is fine, but it's that mindset that we've got to build a whole new tower of learning when actually a lot of other people have got bricks that we can use. Probably mixed my metaphors a lot during that, but anyway, number 2. I want to say that my second mistake was rushing into things, but I don't think it was that. I don't think it's wrong to be eager to start doing things and being intentional with our learning, even when our kids are small. But what I tried to do was go wide rather than deep. And I really see the difference now. I'm on my 3rd kid and they're just coming up 3.5 years old, which is when I kind of started thinking about this more with my first kid. And he knew all of his phonics by 3. We did lots of maths and he knew all of his shapes. I've got videos of him jumping to octagons on the floor. And I remember thinking, we've got it. He knew a ton of stuff, but if we didn't look at it again for a little while, then that would be forgotten a bit because it was going wide rather than deep. I wasn't necessarily getting the deep foundations in. Whereas now, my 3-year-old, we just talk a lot about the number 3 because he's 3 and I've got 3 kids, so there are 3 plates to put out. And he really understands and has learned to understand that number 3. What 2 plus 1 is, what happens when we have 1 more than 2. Oh, we've got 3, that's enough for everybody. And we're going deep rather than wide, and I can already see that it's making a big difference. The 3rd mistake is actually a mistake I probably make about 2 or 3 times a week still, and that is the mistake of comparing. It used to really throw me off kind of the path that we were going on when somebody else said, oh, my kid read this book, or I saw a picture of somebody doing writing that was a lot more than we were doing. Or even school and comparing with school and knowing in the back of our mind that if my kid went into school, there'd be certain things where I'd think, yeah, he'll be great and way ahead, and other things that I would think that the teachers would probably be aghast at. And that would send me into a bit of a spiral of looking for solutions to solve what wasn't actually a problem at all. And I don't need to say why comparing is ridiculous, but I have to really train myself not to compare. And so it's a mistake that can really just push you off the direction that you're going, and can send you spiraling, send you on 3 o'clock in the morning Google searches. We shouldn't compare. There's no point to it, and it ends up hurting us really as we try and figure out some solutions to non-existent problems. So number 3, big mistake I made was comparing. The 4th mistake is something that probably applies to a lot of areas in my life, is that I announced my opinions very loudly and very proudly. Opinions that weren't necessarily based on experience. I used to be against home ed. I haven't made a secret of that. I mentioned that before. I used to be really anti-homeschooling, and I announced that very loudly and proudly. And obviously that's something that now I have to reconcile with. And at the beginning of my home ed journey, I would see people using workbooks, and I would be shocked and think, how can their kid learn anything from a workbook? Well, guess what my kids love to use now? A workbook. And guess what actually helps keep us consistent and helps them learn and take ownership of things? Workbooks. It's not the only thing we do, but I'm pretty sure with the other people who are using workbooks, that wasn't the only thing that they did. But I remember distinctly a conversation with my husband where I went on and on. He probably didn't care at all, but went on and on about how these people were just using workbooks and that's not really proper education and on and on. And yeah, sometimes when you announce your opinions really, really loudly, it makes it harder to change them. So I think, especially at the beginning, I wish I hadn't quite announced those. It's a bit like parenting, isn't it? When you have all these rules that you're going to have and you haven't even had your first kid. So that takes me on to number 5, actually. Yes, so number 5, I did learn this a little bit as a new mother. When you get comfortable thinking, oh brilliant, they're sleeping this many hours, and then you realise it was just a phase and the next stage of development comes and that changes things up. It's a little bit like that with home ed, that sometimes I would get comfortable. I think we figured it out, that we had the system, the routine, the rhythms, the resources that we were going to keep on using. And there has not been one single routine, curriculum. I tell a lie, our nature curriculum we've consistently used, but not in the same way each year. But there's not been one thing that we've kept to the whole time, because sometimes I get bored, sometimes the kids get bored, sometimes the need that we had for it just disappears, sometimes the weather changes, and that has a big impact on how our days go. So I think my mistake was that sometimes I would get comfortable enough to just tell everyone that I'd figured it out as well, comfortable enough to sometimes talk as if I was an expert on it, comfortable enough that I would be like spending hours making resources that reflected this new choice that we've been doing for a week, that I thought, like, this is it, we've cracked it. So yeah, that's a mistake that I don't think I make it as much. I'm definitely not comfortable. There are some rhythms that we're in that I'm like, yeah, this is kind of the vibe that we're going with, but I know that that might not last forever. I know that every stage with my kids is going to be different. Every context that we're in, every community that we're in is going to completely impact that. So yeah, that was my 5th mistake, getting comfortable. So how about you? What do you think are things that we should not be doing as home educators? What mistakes have you made that you would like to warn people about? Pop them in the comments below, and if possible, share this video, because that means we get to be making more and more of these to help start conversations for other homeschoolers. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later.